Evening all student, UPSC aspirant, English medium student. Thanks for joining me once again. Today's class, chapter 7, new questions and ideas. So you all student, let's go ahead. So Angha school trip. This was the first time Angha was going on a school trip. They boarded the train from Pune in Maharashtra late at night to go all the way to Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh. Her mother, who came to see her off at the station, told the teacher to tell the children about the Buddha and take them to see Sarnath as well. So let's go ahead next. The story of the Buddha. Siddhartha, also known as Gautam, the founder of Buddhism, was born about 2500 years ago. This was a time of rapid change in the life of people. As you saw in chapter 6, some kings in the Mahajanpad were growing more powerful. New cities were developing and life was changing in the villages as well. See chapter 10. Many thinkers were trying to understand these changes in society. They also wanted to try and find out the true meaning of life. The Buddha belonged to a small Gana known as the Shakya Gana and was a Kshatriya. When he was a young man, he left the comfort of his home in search of knowledge. They wandered of several years, meeting and holding discussion with other thinkers. He finally decided to find his own path to realization and meditate for days on end under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar, where he attained enlightenment. After that, he was known as the Buddha or the Wise One. He then went to Sarnath. Sarnath is stay Varanasi, near Varanasi, where he taught for the first time. He spent the rest of his He spent the rest of his life traveling on foot, going from palace to palace, teaching people till he passed away at Kusanar. The Buddha taught that life is full of suffering and unhappiness. This is caused because we have craving and desire which often cannot be fulfilled. Sometimes, even if we get what we want, we are not satisfied and want even more or want other things. The Buddha described this as thirst or tanha. He thought that this constant carving could be removed by following moderation in everything. He also taught people to be kind and to respect the lives of others, including animals. He lived it that the result of our action called karma, whether good or bad, affect us both in this life and the next. The Buddha taught in the languages of the ordinary people Prakrit, so that everybody could understand his message. So, you all a student, you look at the picture as a stoop. The stoop at Sarnath, near Varanasi. So, look at this picture. This building known as a stoop was built to mark the palace where the Buddha first taught. As message, you will learn more about stoops in chapter 12. So look at this picture, a stoop near Varanasi. So let's go ahead, you all student. He also encouraged people to think for themselves rather than to simply accept what he said. Let's us see how he did this. Next, Upanishad. Upanishad. Before the story of Kisa Gautami, here is a famous story about the Buddha. Once there was a woman named Kisa Gomati whose son had died. She was so sad that she roamed through the street of the city carrying the child crying the child with her, asking her for help to bring him back to life. A kind man took her to the Buddha. The Buddha said, "Bring me a handful of mustard seeds, and I will bring your child back to life." Kisagomti was overjoyed and started off at once, but the Buddha gently stopped her and added, "The seeds must come from the house of a family where nobody has died." Kisa Gomati went from door to door, but wherever she went, she found out that someone or the other, father, mother, uncle, sister, brother, husband, wife, child, auntie, grandfather, grandmother had died. So I ask you all student one questions. What was the Buddha trying to teach the sorrowing mother? The story of Kisa Gomati. So you all student think and write, pen, note down. I ask you one questions, you all student. What was the Buddha trying to teach the sorrowing mother? So let's go ahead. Upanishad. Around the times that the Buddha was preaching, and perhaps a little earlier, other thinkers also tried to find answers to difficult questions. Some of them wanted to know about life after death. Others wanted to know why sacrifices should be performed. Many of these thinkers felt that this was something permanent in the universe that would last even after death. They describe his as the Atma, or the individual soul, and the Brahma, or the universal soul. They believed that ultimately both the Atma and the Brahma were one. Many of their ideas were recorded in the Upanishad. These were part of the later Vedic texts. Upanishad literally means approaching and sitting near, and the text contain conversation between teacher and students. Often ideas were presented through simple dialogue. Most Upanishad thinkers were men, especially Brahman and Rajas. Occasionally, there is mention of women thinkers such as Gorgi. Gorgi, who was famous for her learning and participated in debates held in royal courts. Poor people rarely took part in this discussion. One famous expectation was Satyakama Jabal Jabla, who was named after his mother, the slave woman Jabli. He had a deep desire to learn about reality, was accepted as a student by a Brahmin teacher named Gautama and became one of the best known thinkers of the time. Many of the ideas of the Upanishad were later developed by the famous thinker Shankaracharya, about whom you will read in class 7th. So let's go ahead. Jainism. The most famous thinker of the Jainism, Bardhaman Mahavira, also separated his message around this time that 25 years ago he was a Kshatriya prince of the Lichvi, a group that was part of the Vajji Sangh, about which you read in chapter 6. So, at the age of 30, he left home and went to live in a forest. For 12 years, he led a hard and lonely life, at the end of which he attained enlightenment. He taught a simple doctrine: men and women who wished to know the truth must leave their homes. They must follow very strictly the rules of ahimsa, means non-violence, which means not hurting or killing living beings. All beings said, Mahavira longed to live. To all things, life is dear. Ordinary people could understand the teaching of Mahavira and his followers because they used Prakrit. There were several forms of Prakriti used in different parts of the country and named after the regions in which they were used. For example, the Prakrit spoken in Magad was known as Magadhi. Followers of Mahavira, who were known as Jain, had to lead very simple lives, begging for food. They had to be absolutely honest and were especially asked not to steal. Also, they had to observe celibacy, and men had to give up everything, including their clothes. It was very difficult from most men and women to follow these strict rules. So Jain, the word was Zina. Jain comes from the term Jin. Jin meaning conquer. So nevertheless, thousands left their homes to learn and teach this new way of life. Many more remained behind and supported those who became monks and nuns, providing them with food. Jainism was supported mainly by traders, farmers who had to kill insects to protect their crops, found it more difficult to follow the rules over hundreds of years. Jainism separated to different parts of North India and to Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. The teachings of Mahavira and his followers were transmitted orally for several centuries. They were written down in the form in which they are presently available at a palace called Vallavi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. Next, the Sangh. Both the Mahavira and the Buddha felt that only those who left their homes could gain true knowledge. They arranged for them to stay together in the Sangh and association of those who left their homes. The rules made for the Buddhist Sangha were written down in a book called in Vinay Pitak. From this, we know that there were separated branches for men and women. All men could join the Sangha. However, children had to take the permission of their parents and slaves that of their masters. Those who worked for the king had to take his permission and after that of creators. Women had to take their husband's permission. Men and women who joined the Sangh lead simple lives. They meditate for most of the time and went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. That is why they were known as bhikshuk. Bhikshuk, the Prakrit word for beggar, and bhikshuni, the Prakritic word for beggar, female. They taught others and helped one another. They also held meetings to settle any quarrels that took place within the Sangh. Those who joined the Sangh included Brahmin, Kshatriya, merchants, laborers, braver, courtesans, and slave. Many of them wrote down the teaching of the Buddha. Some of them also composed beautiful poems, describe their life in the Sangha. So let's go ahead. Monarchies took begin with both Jain, the Buddha monk, went from palace to palace throughout the year.